and welcome to another Wolftime gaming video, and a Merry Christmas to you all. Today I'm going to be painting up Jakkob Bugmansson, or Jakkob Bugmansson, depending on how you want to pronounce it, as a sort of Santa style. Been inspired by the Warhammer video that came out recently, and I've wanted to get this guy for a little while, ever since I saw him announced. Before we get started though, as usual, let's get that kettle on. As you can see, I've got him built and I've given him a really good spray now, good base coat with Games Workshop's contrast spray paint, Wraithbone. It's a great colour, seeps into the recesses really nicely, so it doesn't hide any of those details that we want. But as you can see, there we go, we've got him ready to go now. He's all nicely sprayed. You'll notice I haven't actually attached him to the base yet because he's really fiddly, and because he's quite small, there's lots of areas that I want to get into, and I'm not going to be able to do that with him attached to the base. So we'll start painting him with the paint, getting into all those cracks and crevices, and then we'll stick him on the base bit halfway through. And to start with the painting, the first thing that we're going to do is the face, or the eyes at least, to try and get that out of the way. It's always a really fiddly area to work on, but I've found quite a simple way of painting eyes recently, or over this year. I've actually developed this now, and I do it on pretty much all of my minis, and all I get is a little bit of black paint. In this instance I'm using Corvus Black, and all I'm doing is drawing a line essentially in place of where the eyes are. You can see really nicely there on his left eye. I'm also just popping a little bit of black paint just into his mouth as well, just so it darkens it down before we actually get to the skin. Now the next stage in doing the eyes is to use white paint in exactly the same way, and all we're doing is drawing essentially the eyeball within that dark area that we've created. Now you will find with Jakkob here that the eye recesses are really deep. Some of the deeper ones I've actually seen, so it's a little bit of a pain to actually get into, and I had to go in a few times where usually I'd say only ever draw one line, don't go back in, just leave it as that, because you tend to mess up. But I actually had to go in a few times with this. Now to paint on the actual eyeball, the iris itself, I've just used a little black paint. I don't bother using colours. It's a bit of a waste of time. It's so small you don't really notice, but you do notice if he's missing an iris completely. So all I'm doing is getting a little bit of black paint, and as you can see, I'm just dotting it just in the centre of the eye there, in a line, not trying to make a circle, because that doesn't work either. Because if you look at an iris naturally, it's not like a big round circle. We don't have big round eyes, do we? Now before we actually moved on to the skin, one thing I did notice was just around the back of the head here, it's sort of this cushioned area, and I thought if I end up doing the skin, I'll definitely get red all over the top of it and have to go back and redo it. So I'm just painting this area essentially to make it a little bit easier, and just in like the bottom around the neck as well, just to make it a bit easier when we actually come to the skin areas. I am using a contrast paint for this, and it's just the Contrast Blood Angels Red. And while I've got it out and got it on the actual brush, I may as well do the other red areas around the actual model itself. So I did have a think about how I want to do this. Do I want to make his armour red? Do I want to do his clothing? I wasn't really sure. I thought, if I went for the armour, it would be brighter and you'd see it more. But I felt that a golden sort of colour for the armour would look really cool. And it's over the top of his red jacket that he was wearing, and trousers. So that's what I've done here. I've just painted it all red, just around the back, as I said, and then the trousers and the jacket itself. Now moving on to the skin, as you can see, I've already started painting that there. The first stage is Contrast Gulliman Flesh. And this is essentially just put it all over the skin. Take your time, get it all into those areas. Make sure you don't get it on the beard, because we want to keep that sort of base coat for the beard, because it's easier to actually leave the beard as the base coat rather than try and paint white onto it again. You can also actually pick up a second contrast paint for the skin, which I'm using Fire Slayer Flesh, just to drop into the recesses around the nose. He's got quite a big nose, so it works really well just on the edge of the nose, and just drops in. It gives it a little bit more definition than just keeping it the standard Gulliver Flesh. Now, talking about his beard, it's the perfect time to actually paint that now. And all I'm using is Contrast Apothecary White. Now, you may have seen, if you've been watching any of my other videos, I've used this recently on some Star Wars figures, and they look absolutely fantastic. And I thought it was an ideal time to actually try and use it on a bit of hair and see what sort of an effect it has. Now, in the past, when I've done like sort of white beards or grey beards, I've gone with a null oil straight over the white, and that looks quite good. But I wanted this to stay very, very bright rather than it being dulled down completely by null oil. And I think the Apothecary White works really, really well and gives it sort of like a icy feel as well. Following on from the beard, I thought it was time to actually get some of the brown areas done. So I'm using another contrast paint called Wildwood. Fantastic paint, really nice mid-coloured brown. You don't really need to do any highlighting if you don't want to, and I think it looks great. So I've used it for the main area of the barrel, the sides of the barrel itself, where the rest of it I'm going to be doing a silvery sort of a colour. And I'm also painting the gloves as well, because I wanted those to be different from the rest of the model essentially. I did consider leaving them white or going with a red, but I think the brown actually looks more realistic as such, so I went with that one. Now it was time to start the actual armour itself, and to do that I've used Retributor armour. And if you've seen any of my really quite old videos now on the Custodes, I actually used the same colour for the Custodes, and I think it's a really, really nice, very bright gold. And now it does look really, really bright, but we're going to be taking that down a notch with some shades later on in the video, but for now it's just a complete covering of Retributor armour over the whole of the armour essentially. I've just left there's a couple of like little stabilizers type things on his legs, so I've just left those white for the moment because I'm going to be painting those silver. As you can see, it's looking really, really good now. It's starting to take shape. The colours around the head are looking really, really nice. That gold is very, very bright, but as I say, I'll be taking that down a notch later on with this sort of a paint scheme I've gone for. You can also see I've picked out like the X's on the back, on the barrel, also a few of the pipes and things as well, just to add a little bit of interest really and make those a little bit different from the rest of the actual model and barrel. Now I moved on to the silver, which is Leadbelcher. Now if you've watched any of my videos, you'll know Leadbelcher is my go-to for any silver paint. Now I really like Leadbelcher because you can add different shades and things to it and essentially get different effects. Now you can do that with any other silver, but time and trusted, you know, I've used Leadbelcher for a long time now, and I'm sort of I don't really want to move away from that either. All I'm doing here is, you can see he's painting like the mechanisms around the barrel. I'm going to paint all the barrel apart from those brown areas with this silver sort of a paint, and also the tankards around his actual weapon itself as well, because he's got to defend himself against all those trolls and Krampus for trying to steal all those presents. But you can see now there's lots of little white areas on the model still. But there's a lot of silver on here. I've gone with, again, it looks very, very bright along with that gold, almost too bright, but you'll see later on the effect that it can have once we put some shades on there. Looks really, really good. Okay, now it's time to pop that final paint on before we actually sort the base out and stick him on that base, and that is another contrast paint called Black Templar. Now I really like this one. It's a nice colour, gives sort of a sort of grey sort of a feel to it, but that's obviously because it's a contrast paint and you can see the base is showing up really nicely. But all I'm doing is painting the rock. There's a few bits of it in his actual boots that are hidden under the armour, so I painted those black as well, which isn't necessarily visible, but I think it looks really, really good. And there's a few other areas just on the back of the barrel there, you've got that glass bit. Now, basing wise, I'm just going to use a little bit of cork. I've upgraded his base and given him a wider base because I want him to look more effective, you know, more heroic, I suppose, with a bigger base on the table. But I'll probably just use him for display. And I've also got these little crystal things that I got from another game called, from Warplock Miniatures. I'm going to be using these with him as well to give him a little bit more of a magical sort of Christmassy, icy feel. So the first stage in painting the base obviously is to give it a spray. I've used just a Baden Black spray paint just to actually give it a decent base coat. The first colour, I suppose you could say, that I'm putting on there is Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm just dry brushing that. If you haven't dry brushed before, all you do is get a little bit of paint on the brush, wipe the majority off onto a piece of tissue or something like that. Essentially, you're wiping most of the paint off the brush and then going at it, and that way it only picks out the main raised areas rather than painting the actual feature that you're trying to get to, which is why you're putting it almost on dry. I've also then gone on to a second grey paint. This time it's Administratum Grey. Sorry, no, Dawnstone actually was the second paint I used, the grey paint I used, just to bring those raised areas up a little bit more. And then finally I used Administratum Grey on there as well, just to highlight all of those areas as well. You can see all of these are dry brushed. You can see I've concentrated to the centre of the rock as well to give it sort of a dirty, murky feel around the edges. And then gone around the edges of the actual rock, or the cork that I'm using as rock. And what this does is pick out all of those nice raised details and looks really effective. Now I am going to put snow on the majority of this, but I think this looks really, really good to actually try and put a few different colours down on it, because it adds to the model and adds to the realism. Not that these are real, but you get what I mean. Now you can see I've just popped these crystals around the edges there, just around the edges of the actual base itself. So they look quite effective. They're all angled as well, which I think is a really nice look. It gives a really nice sense of realism, as it were. And rather than it just being straight up out the ground, I think they're really, really nice. I want to try and pick some more of these up actually now. And you can see I've actually stuck Bugman down as well, so there's no more need to touch the actual model itself when we're painting and wipe any of the paint off that we've actually already done, which is, is pretty devastating if we do that. Now, to pick out some of the red details around the model, I've just used a Mephiston red as on top of the actual contrast red paints, because some of the details are quite small. We don't want to use contrast paints on them because they'd actually run into the rest of the model we don't want. So there's a slight detailing around the bottom of the tankard, and he's obviously got two tankards just hanging off his barrel there as well. So all we're doing is picking out that same detail just around the bases. Now you can see everything's looking really, really bright at the moment. It's all looking a little bit too much. And when I was actually doing this, I was like, oh, is this going to work? But you'll see later on in the model, in the painting this model, it looks really effective. Now, because we couldn't paint, or I could have painted the bees on the actual tankards when I did the gold earlier, but I didn't, because I wanted to get the silver paint on first before I decided what colour to go with the bee for Bugmansson. So I went with again the same gold paint, which is Retributor armour, and just picked out those details. I then had a little bit of a look around the model, see if there was anywhere else, and there was a couple of little bits that I could pick out as a different colour, so I painted those with the Retributor armour as well. Now, because he's got sort of two straps around each of his gloves, I wanted these to stand out from the rest of the glove, so I grabbed a sort of normal base paint called Mournfang Brown, really sort of very light brown in comparison to the contrast Wildwood. But by putting this on there, you're adding that extra little bit of detail, you're making it stand out a bit more. Not every piece of clothing is the same colour, so adding something like this in there really does make it stand out. I also just went over the knuckles as well, just with the Mournfang Brown in a similar way to dry brushing, and just picked out a few of those little raised areas just to add a little bit more interest to it. And you'll see it all blends together when we go into this part now, which is the Nuln Oil. So to start with the Nuln Oil, all I did was grab my pot of Nuln Oil, and I caked all of the silver areas and all of the gold areas with that Nuln Oil. I also went onto the browns as well, where I'd done the brown around his gloves, just to blend that Mournfang into the actual Wildwood really, really nicely. Didn't need to go on too thick. The axe as well is a good one. It drops into the recesses really, really nicely around that red detail on the axe that you'll see in a second. I concentrated quite a lot on the X's there because I wanted the recesses around the X's to look really, really nice. Now, jumping ahead slightly now, while I was wanting to do a few more bits and pieces, I wanted to really see how this snow worked, and I went on there with the Valhalla Blizzard. And all I've done is concentrate around any areas that snowfall would essentially stay. You know, there's a lot of cracks and crevices on the actual rocks itself, so you just put a little bit on there. Maybe it gets stuck around the actual crystals and things. You know, no one's going to be stepping in that area, so that's a good place to put it. Around the rock that is stood on as well, just so it blends into the model nicely. Otherwise, just a little tiny bit just on top of the actual core rock area, because you know that's the bit that would melt or would blow off quite easily. You know, you got to think how snow moves, and it moves into cracks and crevices quite easily. Now, moving on to one of the most difficult areas of the model, or at least what I found was one of the most difficult areas, was the actual beer in the back. Now I'm starting with Xandridust here, and all I'm doing is doing that, like painting that sloshing sort of wavy effect with the Xandridust in the back of the like the sort of lensed area. And then the next stage was to try and turn that a little bit golden yellow. So I've used Avalanche Sunset. If you go on the Games Workshop YouTube channel or website, you'll see that they've done a very similar thing, but they haven't used Xandridust as a base. They used the Tau XV88 or something like that paint as a base coat, and went there with Avalanche Sunset. Now I've used the Xandridust because I prefer that. I prefer that sort of a colour mixed with the Avalanche Sunset, and I think it looks really, really nice on there. Now the next stage was to actually do the froth itself. Now I've gone completely different to what they did, and I've gone straight on there with the Administratum Grey, and I've actually painted the base of the froth Administratum Grey. Now you can see I've gone with a similar sort of pattern to what they did, and having the liquid area on the one side with the froth on the other, like it's moving backwards and forwards. You know, when you shake around any sort of substance like this, you always get the bubbles and things staying together, and the liquid will go to the top. It won't be completely coated, as you know, when I first started thinking about this, I thought, do I do the just a froth all the way across the top? But I don't think it'd work, and I think what Games Workshop did with the froth on the one side works really, really well and looks more realistic, so I've followed suit essentially. Now, to pick out the detail of the actual froth and make it a little bit brighter, I've gone with the Corax White to really, really bring that up nicely. Don't go too thickly with this if you do try and do it. You want some of the grey to show through, same way as with the Avalanche Sunset and the Xandridust. You just want to dot it on there a little bit to make it look a little bit more realistic and give it some depth as well. And to shade that, I've gone out straight over the top with Agrax Earthshade, very, very lightly over the actual painted areas, and concentrated more heavily around the edges. Don't forget to do that black area as well, just so you've got uniformity just around the edges, because if you were just to do the bottom with the sort of browny sort of colour, then and not do the top, it would stand out as being different. It is important to try and do that. And just to actually finish that off, I've gone with a Vallejo gloss varnish that I've had for a very, very long time now. And all you do with this is just grab a little bit of the gloss varnish, stick it onto a plate or palette or anything like that, and then just literally stick that gloss varnish just on that lens area, and it makes it shine really, really nicely. But there you have it. Model is complete. I think he looks fantastic. You can see now what I was talking about with the null dropping into all those recesses really, really nicely. It really gives it shade all around his feet, all around the actual barrel itself. You can see it's dropped into all the holes, all those recesses nicely. It looks great around the tankers as well. You've got that sort of darker area around all those recesses, and I think he looks absolutely amazing. And you can see some greeny red lights in the background. That's what's giving him sort of a greeny red effect, and he doesn't really have that normally, but I think he looks absolutely amazing. The face looks great. He's so detailed, this model is. Games Workshop are doing absolutely amazing with these things at the minute, and he looks absolutely brilliant. You can see what I did on the gold as well. I did pick out a few of the silver areas that you didn't really see in the painting video so much. There's a couple of the rivets and the raised areas and things like that, and I did that as I went on with the model, and I think he's really good. I'm really, really pleased. I think it looks really Christmassy. If you haven't seen Games Workshop's advert for this guy, it's coming up right now, but make sure you do hit that subscribe button, give me a like, and most of all, enjoy your Christmas, however you're spending it. watching, guys. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.